Good afternoon, everyone, and happy St. Patrick's Day. March 17th, we're here, another week of Spotlight. Delighted today to welcome Andy Caddy. Andy and I go back a couple years. As you know, for the format, we always look back a year, we look forward a year. About a year ago, Andy landed in a new job that certainly had an impact with COVID. So it's going to be a really interesting conversation today. Just by way of background, Andy started his career in technology, undergrad in engineering, but went into retail, went over to banking. Laterally was group CTO at EasyJet, and then went into one of the Richard Branson's Virgin companies, was CTO of a business inside of Virgin, and until his recent role was CTO of Whitbread, which is a large hospitality group in the UK. So lots and lots of experience in retail, what I call shoulder-to-shoulder businesses, which have certainly felt their changes here in the last year. Andy, I never do anyone's bio justice, so maybe you can fill in a few of those pieces, maybe what I left out, or you can kind of fill in the blanks as I describe your background.
Sure. Afternoon. Good afternoon, Mark. Where do you want me to start? So,
yeah,
I mean, I kind of always think about my career as the stuff I like doing, which is affecting change for people, and mostly that's been around consumer brands and customer experience. I think that's really where my sweet spot is. I think that's what links certainly the last 15 years of what I've been doing, really working with great brands and great customer experiences. That's essentially what my role is.
That's great. And you wore, and we're going to touch on the collective here in a moment, but just prior at Whitbread, where you were for several years, you were both a CTO hat and head of digital. So it wasn't, in that role, digital wasn't carved out into a CDO type role, but you wore two hats. You wore the CTO role, technical architecture, et cetera, but then you also had the effectively a CDO type hat on to evolve the business into digital. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think my roles at Whitbread and at Virgin Active have both sort of been across both areas, so product and those sorts of areas. I mean, I was lucky enough, if I go back to Virgin Active, I was lucky enough to design a group cycle class. Can you believe? I mean, I was involved in delivering that globally, so real varied stuff there. At Whitbread, we had, when I joined there, it was Costa and Premier Inn, two big brands in the UK, biggest coffee chain and biggest hotel chain. And across both of those, I was looking after digital bits of the digital area, and then eventually all of the product area under Premier Inn. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey, and I think that the sort of Venn diagram of traditional technologists and product is getting closer. There's a lot more overlap these days than there were in the past. I wonder about CDOs in the future, and CTO and all these role names, how they'll evolve in the next 5 years, because we'll see a gradual merging of those areas, I think, and less about the technical hardcore, IT, and more around business affecting technology. So I think that's, we'll see how that develops.
Right, and that has been a consistent theme over the last several weeks in our Spotlight series. Is people with technology roles are really putting a strong business face on what they do, and yeah, you got to turn the crank on the technology bits. But to a T, I think every week we've had a conversation about being a business leader first, and what that really looks like. A business leader that happens to be responsible for a lot of kit. So we'll probably get into that here in the next half hour or so. So as we like to do in this format, Andy, we like to look back kind of a year and what really happened for you professionally in 2020, and then looking forward a year. That's roughly the two bits we do, and then we'll end it with some, a few kind of futuristic questions. But I just want to go back really quick and touch on the Whitbread experience, because you described that as had the property group in it, the Premier Inns, which is the largest chain hotel in the UK, if I'm not mistaken, but also Costa Coffee, which is a very, very strong brand. Just a quick one. You were there when Costa was carved out and bought by that Atlanta soft drinks company, Coca-Cola, weren't you?
I was indeed, yeah. Yeah. We were. I was at Whitbread for 3 years, and for the first, it sort of splits half and half really. So the first half of my time there, I was looking after across both groups, and then we sold in a great deal. A really incredible deal for all parties. Actually, we sold Costa Coffee to Coca-Cola, and that meant that Coke got a great coffee brand. It meant that Costa got a new owner that could really inject and open up a supply chain that perhaps Whitbread couldn't, and then Whitbread got a lot of cash, which was great for everybody actually, and they've gone from strength to strength. It's been really good to see my old team at a time when Costa's had to deliver click and collect across the country. We'd started that off when it was under me, launching it in London, and it's just gone on to great heights since.
And there's a story going around, public information, but there's a story going around that as saturated as some global cities look with Starbucks, particularly here in North America and the US, that Coca-Cola still sees a heck of a lot of growth. And that's why they picked up the Costa brand, because even as prevalent as you see, retail coffee, there's a lot of analysis to say there's still growth there. So.
Yeah, no, there's huge growth. And I think you look at Asia as well, and just see the fact that Starbucks have got many countries in the West wrapped up, and are number one in so many countries. The UK stands alone in that, in as much. But when you look at Asia and the city and the spread, especially in China, Costa's got a great presence out there. Not a lot of people know that we've got a great presence out in China, and the ability to be able to expand that brand, is, you can see why it was a great deal.
Good. So the Collective, a lot of people may not have heard about the business. You started in April of 2020. I suspect you were interviewing pre-pandemic, and you saw there's a nice industry to go into, hospitality, and we're going to reinvent and rethink the hotel experience and the co-living experience, and you segmented all out. A very interesting story. And then COVID hits, and then you're probably not how long we're gonna be in this, and now we're in this a year. Tell us a bit more about your move into the Collective. Maybe a bit more about the business. I think the company's raised over £1 billion now, if I'm not mistaken. It has a large war chest to really think through what the future of hospitality now looks like. So talk to us about your journey landing there, and then help us unpack a bit more about the kinds of things that the business has been thinking about, from a technology perspective in the past 12 months.
Yeah, so when I left Whitbread, I decided I was going to take a break, because I had a long period of working, and took out 3 months at the beginning of 2020, which turned out to be the worst time in modern history to ever take a career break. But I've been talking to a number of different places about potential roles, and I had it in my head that after doing a number of large corporates, it would be great to do something smaller, and something where that was developing and I could be a part of. And I talked to, as I said, a number of companies. The Collective was an ongoing discussion. I'd had talks with the team here for a long time. So I met them before the pandemic broke, and I met them as the pandemic broke. But good for them that they kept talking to me during that whole time. And we eventually, I joined during lockdown. And probably a once in a lifetime experience to join a company. And there are still members of my team I haven't physically met, but we've all got used to it, right? That's not an uncommon story these days. Collective is very interesting. It's a sort of disruptor in the accommodation space, but we're also a vertically integrated owner operator. So we buy and develop land into these co-living buildings. And by co-living, we mean places people stay for variable lengths of time, but often a year, 2 years, 3 years with us. And they have a complete environment. So they have where they stay. They also have bars and restaurants, gyms, pools, facilities, co-working. So we're really curating their life for them, and that's the really interesting part I find about what we're trying to do at the Collective. This isn't just about apartment blocks. This is about how do you create a better way of living for people. We started anchoring in London and New York. Today we have 2 properties in London and 1 in New York, but we've got 5 more in construction right now, and then we have 13 more in various stages of planning and approval. So you're potentially 20 buildings in over the next 4 or 5 years, 11 of which will be in London. So a real chance to become hopefully a recognized brand for where people will turn to if they've got a different view about how they want to live. And for me, that's so interesting. You know, I look at our opportunity, not just from a technology point of view, just as from a company point of view and how we want to change this, because I think we're at a point now where that demographic and our sort of sweet spot of demographics probably around about the age of 32. The average salary for us is about 40K. So it's a great spot to be aiming at. But for that audience, I think things are different now. And our chance to talk to them differently, offer them a different product, really create a lifestyle that just is frictionless for them, it's just a huge opportunity for us. And technology and digital is all across that. So really exciting point to join. As you said, we've got funding from a range of investors. The stage we're at means that funding and going forward is always a challenge, but we are doing pretty well. We've got a big network of an investment community. So it's looking good for our future. And I think as we create value through the development of these incredible buildings, we're creating a brilliant portfolio of real estate as well behind it, which we own. So the security of knowing that you've got a base behind there as well. So really interesting opportunity, and at a point where we are scaling up and growing is a great time for me to come in and help with my experience from having worked in many companies in the past.
Andy, I know you're very passionate about customer experience, and it's kind of been one of the hallmarks of your career, and it's so important in retail. As you think about customer experience and what you call curation of lives, curation of that environment where home and work blend, and these all-encompassing environments or facilities that you built 3, and sounds like another 23 on the way, between 10 under construction and 13 under development. What gets you excited when you get to rethink those experiences from a customer journey perspective, and to the extent that it's not, privately held or shall I say secret, but can you give us a few more snippets of the kinds of ways you're thinking about? Because we've all stayed in hotels, and we've all rented flats, and we've all owned homes, or a lot of us. But what would you do different from a customer experience, or unique, or fun, or light, or lively that makes that unique?
So our buildings, we started off. Our founder, who's CEO, Reza Merchant, he started off at university. So he started off with this concept of co-living with small buildings, 30 to 50 rooms, let's say. And it was good and it worked, but he realized quite early on that what you really need is to create stuff at scale, because it's about creating a community, and community works at scale. And we opened our first large building in 2016 and the second one in 2019. And what you see there are apartments of, say, 500, and in the second one's case at Canary Wharf, 700 rooms, so 700 people staying. That size of community gives you some great opportunities to ensure that everyone is always engaged at the right level for them. So if you are an introvert who wants to only be involved in certain aspects and you want to work in that way, that's great. There's ways of helping people in that life. If you're an extrovert who wants to get involved in, Samba and yoga and all sorts of stuff, there's stuff for them. It's the range of experience we can offer people in a way that is super convenient. So we thrive around our communities and our events. And when I see and talk to our members who get involved in the events, we often say people come for the convenience, but they stay for the community. So they come along because they think, oh, it's great, I've got it all on one bill, it's very easy. And then they realize there's this rich set of people they're living with. And for me, the chance to broaden that and to be able to give life to more ability for people to be satisfied in their life. So during lockdown, I think we've all seen the situation where there are people who are stuck in 1-bedroom flats or flat sharing with a whole bunch of people. And lockdown's been really hard work. Some of my team, I've seen the same sort of thing going on. And it makes you wonder about how we're going to live in the future. In our buildings, there is so much space and so much design thought that goes into creating places for people to interact or to work or to live. I think it gives opportunities that we wouldn't have elsewhere. So the bit I'm really excited about is how do I help people with that? If I'm living with 700 other people, how do I make sure that's the right balance of it works for me and my life, but also where do I have those interactions, and how can we as the collective sort of facilitate those interactions? I think about that everything from, personally, romantically, career-wise, everything's there, right? So it's a sort of mini community, and my thinking all the time at the moment is what do I need to do to make that happen for people? And I'll give you an example, Mark. Just several of my teams stay at our properties, which is great, right? I mean, they talk about advocates of the products. I was talking to one of them the other day, and someone came down, and in the background they were playing beautiful piano. So there's a piano in one of the foyers, sort of concert pianist standard. And I said, "Wow, that's impressive." And she said, "Oh yeah, that's one of 2 professional pianists who are in our building." And she said sometimes we have evenings where they'll put on a small event and they'll just play for the residents. And it just makes you understand that when you've got 700 people, the chances are somebody does do something that's really interesting, or maybe someone does something that's just like you, or maybe somebody does something that'll be really useful to you. The idea of being able to make those connections over a long period of time. My interaction with my customers, my members, might be for 2 years. When I was at EasyJet, our interaction was for a weekend or a week-long holiday, which was great. We did awesome stuff with that. But now I've got the opportunity to interact with people for portions of their life. I mean, that's a privilege.
Andy, this is fascinating. A lot of CTOs and CIOs that I have conversations with like this, they're talking about cloud, and they're talking about what's the next hot vendor that I need to, onboard to deliver some value to the business. But what you're describing now and curating people's lives, and the way you describe this 700-person property down in Canary Wharf, sounds like you've got to have a deep understanding, and your team does, of psychology and human behavior and social networks. And I mean, I would think to really walk in their shoes and try to, as you said, engage people at the level that they want to be engaged, because 700 people aren't going to have the same level of interactivity, that you really got to click on some different buttons that perhaps there's no such thing as a run-of-the-mill CIO or CTO or CDO, but it's quite an interesting and unusual problem to solve for, I would think, and fascinating and interesting at the same time.
Yeah, I think it works for me. My old boss at EasyJet used to describe me as a digital anthropologist, which is something I clung on to, because I thought, wow, that really is me. How does technology affect the way people behave? That's been my fascination. Mark, I wish I was 10, 15 years younger, because there's never been a better time to be in technology, because we don't have to worry about the vendors and the boxes and wires nearly as much as we used to. We're not talking about how to write big outsourcing contracts, and that's not what the interest is. What we're talking about now is how can you test and try really clever tech that you found, wire it together with some other clever tech you found, and get stuff up and running in days and see if it works. I mean, that's amazing. That's just an amazing place to be. We launched, we white labeled and launched a member app just about a month ago, actually. I mean, the whole thing, beginning to end, was about 12 weeks. And it's astonishing that you can do stuff at scale, at speed now, without having to worry about huge capital investments. I launched the EasyJet app years ago in 2012. That was a huge project, and rightfully so, and it did well. But that was a year-long project to get a thing done, with external agencies and scaling up resource and infrastructure to deal with it. You're just not faced with that anymore. So it's a fantastic time to have this problem to solve. For me personally, it's what I've always been fascinated with, looking at how people function, how they operate, and then figuring out, well, how could technology take some of that away? Or maybe we don't need technology, or maybe it's something different. But we have the ability today, especially with deep understanding of people through data, I think we have the ability to be really relevant and contextual. And we've been promising that in this industry for 10 years. but I actually think it's possible now, and that's really exciting.
Wonderful. If digital anthropologist is not in your LinkedIn profile, I'd ask you to add it. That's wonderful, and I get it. That's quite an insight there. Andy, nearly 2 years ago, you and I sat in a meeting in San Francisco. You'll recall. Well, we had lots of meetings, but one I think about was there was a typical Silicon Valley startup, and we met with their CTO and their technical team, and they were describing that they're largely virtual, and that they were operating, and you were asking very detailed questions about what their build cycle looked like and how fast they were doing releases at scale and all these global customers. And they replied that the only reason that they met physically was to see us that day, and they're all heading back home, where they lived. And I remember walking out on the street, and it was pretty incredulous. It's like, gee, could we ever get there? And then we were forced to get there with COVID. Tell us about your experience, because I remember you walking away, and we kind of, rolled our eyes a bit, and they said, no, they're probably doing that if that's what they said they were doing. And there was some disbelief amongst, some other UK digital leaders. But now that's been forced upon all of us. What were your, and you recall the meeting, what were your takeaways back then in 2019 vis-a-vis as then you thought about 2020? Like, you had to go virtual right away. You had to continue to support some pretty demanding business objectives.
Yeah.
You were a newbie. You didn't have the political capital and social capital built up amongst your team. What was that transition like, where you were immediately virtual in an environment where it had not been done, I suspect?
Yeah, I remember that, and I still talk about that time we went to that company, Mark, because they described themselves as a post-2016 company. I remember it specifically, which I found fascinating. Just the idea that there was a point in time they thought that this was possible, just as where everything came together. It gave me food for thought for weeks to come. And actually, the difference between one of the things we were struggling with when I was at Whitbread was how to bring online all these capabilities to a very, a large company with 30,000 people. At the Collective, it's been really straightforward, because we are a modern company that has no legacy. So all of our systems are cloud-based. We have nothing to worry about in terms of where people operate from. All it's helped us do is probably crystallize some of our thinking already about what does a proper modern hybrid way of working need to look like. I mean, I do worry about, from an industry point of view, no, from a cultural point of view, I don't think we as an industry have solved hybrid working. I don't think that's proven yet. I think this works brilliantly. I think one-to-one on Zoom works great. But the moment you split people between an office and Zoom, the 3 people in an office, 4 people on a Zoom call, everything breaks down, and we go back to kind of voice conferencing in 2003. It's awful. So it feels like there's a problem to be solved there, and I look forward to seeing how people are going to tackle that problem. I don't think we've got a solution yet. There's no clear winners, but we won't know until we're forced to try it. I do think everyone's got a view on this about how things are going to be in the future. I think it's really hard to tell. I'm a bit of a cynic. I think people are creatures of habit. I think there are certain industries that will just try as soon as possible to go back to how they were. But the point is, we've proved it. As you say, it was unproven. It was up to beleaguered CTOs and CIOs to try and say, this is how you could operate. And everyone was very cynical. And now we've had the biggest experiment in history, and we've proved it works.
Got it. And let's switch gears here. We got about 5 minutes left. We're going to keep it short and sharp to 30 minutes.
Yep.
Any shifts in your technology priorities, or even, I suspect the business priorities have shifted a bit in terms of, you think about those 13 development projects. There's probably been some shift there, but how does that change your stature in terms of the technology priorities? Or is it business as usual right now, and you're looking to 2021 and 2022? Or are there fundamental changes from 2020 last year that are asking you to reprioritize or reassess some things?
I think it operates on 2 levels for me. There's 2 real priorities for us. One is data, and getting our data capability to the point where we can really do something with the this wonderful opportunity we've got of helping people with their lives. So how can I enrich all of our data with as much as possible so that we're relevant, but not too much to be creepy, so that I can inform and help members have better lives. So that's a great thing. That starts here and now, and that's something we're working on. And then the longer term piece is around the buildings themselves. So we design and build our own buildings. They're beautiful buildings, and we've got everything on the books, from more properties in London to Dublin to Miami to Chicago. We've got all these places we're going to build these buildings, but the life cycle of that is 3 or 4 years, from planning to development. So trying to think now about how those buildings will be in the future in terms of their green credentials, in terms of power management, what we can do on IoT, what can we do with spaces. You need to be making those decisions soon. So trying to think through and helping with working across the company of what we do about building design, because the temptation is to get very excited about it. How can we put technology everywhere? And that's a common mistake. I think technology needs to be there to solve specific problems. In its own, it doesn't really help people live better lives. It has to be part of a customer journey or a member experience.
Right. And what I'm hearing, or what I may infer, is if the average age of your customer, your clientele, is 32, whether, I'm assuming the assumption internally might be, correct me if I'm wrong, but look, whether they're hybrid or remote or go fully back to the office, they want an environment that's inclusive and open and lively, and there's stuff's going on. The old flat share with a few noisy roommates is gone, but urban areas are going to remain, if not as vibrant as before. They're still going to be attractive to 32-year-olds because they don't want to sit in their lounge for the next 30 years in a career working, off their bed.
Yeah, if anything, the pandemic has really made us double down on our product. If you're going to live somewhere and work at the same place, make that our properties where you've got beautiful views over Greenwich, or you've got a great pool, or you've got these incredible co-working spaces, as well as where you live. So there's this great sense of opportunity there, because as opposed to living, as you say, living in a bedsit or a traditional accommodation for someone. But we had an 82-year-old moving into one of our properties. It's the oldest person on our books at the moment. The other day, we're incredibly proud of that. So we're hoping actually we can extend out beyond the sort of younger demographic in time. But we think we've got a product that definitely is enhanced actually in the current climate.
That's wonderful. Andy, I want to end on this last question we have time for, and that is, what's unique in your toolkit? You've had an amazing run, wonderful career, big global brands you've worked for in very senior roles, but I gotta think there's something you keep in your back pocket, then as and when in situations, maybe it's a bit of wisdom, maybe it's a tool in your toolkit or an arrow in your quiver, but there's got to be something you pull out and use on a pretty consistent basis that allows you to get stuff done, or allows you to align with the business, or allows you to motivate some people. What's the one takeaway that perhaps other digital leaders can learn from?
For me, it's always communication and feedback. So technology, IT and technology leaders historically, haven't always been the best communicators, haven't always been the best people at dealing with how to convey things. I think the pandemic has brought that really into sharp focus, because at a time when you don't have everything available to you in terms of how you communicate, actually being someone who is constantly networking, in contact with people, communicates broadly outward about what we're trying to achieve, is always listening. That's the sort of leader people need right now, I think, both for your own teams and for the wider teams. And then iterating that with feedback, so always asking. We survey our own teams in terms of how we're performing at the collective. I did that when I was at Whitbread and at EasyJet. Being very honest about the messages that come back from that, and then talking to all of your team members and your wider groups of stakeholders to constantly listen and constantly say, what can we be doing better? Because we never know, right? And until somebody tells you, you just don't know whether you're doing the job right. It doesn't matter where you get into in your career. You need somebody to tell you whether you're pointing in the right direction. And I think it's important that you've got great listening skills.
Tried and true wisdom. Yep, we can't over communicate or build those feedback loops. Andy, wonderful. 30 minutes goes very quick. Really, on behalf of CIONET globally, 10,000 digital leaders, we really, really appreciate your time today. I know you had to juggle a few things last minute to make this fit in your schedule. We changed our clocks. And that
yeah. Challenges of global communities.
Yeah, I told you one time, and then of course we changed our clocks in the US. So I appreciate the last notice you making this happen. Join us next week again, noon Eastern. Given the clock changes, we're going to be an hour earlier for GMT and CET. So thanks again, all, and keep in touch and have a good rest of your week. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.